San Junipero is easily the most popular and beloved episode from this new season. Every single video, article, and comment I've seen about it have expressed nothing but praise towards it, which, I'm gonna be honest here, I found to be really surprising. Like, typically my opinion on each episode seems to line up with the general public's, but that wasn't really the case with San Junipero. I mean, I liked it, but I just didn't love it like pretty much everyone else did. Hell, it even got nominated for an Emmy. And I mean, on one hand, yay, Black Mirror got nominated, but on the other, 50 Million Merrits never got nominated. Or White Christmas, so... you know, mixed feelings on that. But anyways, other than my thoughts not lining up with the general consensus, they also didn't exactly line up with most people's interpretation of this episode. The vast majority of viewers have described this episode as a radical departure from the quote-unquote Black Mirror formula due to its optimistic tone and, most surprising of all, its lack of any sad or tragic ending, which has pretty much become a staple of the series. But me, on the other hand, I have a different outlook on all this, but before we get into that, let's talk plot. Today's episode is primarily a romance, a love story between the shy Yorkie and the eccentric and easygoing Kelly, who meet while doing a trial run of the titular San Junipero. San Junipero is, in a nutshell, a sort of VR afterlife. The way it works is that when you're at a point where your death is inevitable, you're given the option to upload your consciousness to San Junipero instead of just dying and hoping that there's an afterlife. Now, despite my general distaste for romantic films, I actually found Kelly and Yorkie's relationship to be really sweet. They both shared amazing chemistry, were really well written, had incredibly well developed backstories, and shared some great, just fantastic lines of dialogue. However, what stops me from calling their relationship great, and in turn from loving this episode, is that I felt that the process of them falling in love took way too long to get going, and when it did, it felt way too rushed, despite it taking a good chunk of the episode's screen time. It just felt like they got really close really fast. Like, okay, let's put it this way. We're told that trial run users are only allowed in San Junipero for 5 hours each week.
She's on the 5-hour weekly limit. I guess you're the same.
So thanks to that, we can somewhat accurately figure out how much time these two have spent together. It's 12 hours in San Junipero and, let's say, 10 hours in the hospital. That's only 22 hours. That's less than a day. But you wouldn't guess that from the dialogue. The dialogue between these two is written in such a way that it gives off the impression like they've known each other for a pretty long time. And in all fairness, it's actually really well written dialogue. But still, it's weird. People don't get this close in such a short amount of time.
And I can't. I wasn't prepared for you, for wanting something so...
That being said though, from Yorkie's perspective, this actually makes some degree of sense because of her backstory. She's been paralyzed for most of her adult life and has never been in a relationship before, so of course she's gonna get attached easily.
You don't know who I am. You don't know what this means.
But not so much with Kelly's. Which brings us to the biggest issue I had with this episode, which is the way they handled Kelly becoming a permanent resident of San Junipero. Like, oh my god, her decision to do this came completely out of nowhere. Literally less than 5 minutes before she makes her choice, Kelly gives this incredibly long and passionate speech about why she refuses to join San Junipero.
We had a daughter. Allison. Always difficult, always beautiful. Died at 39 years old, bless her heart. And Richard and I, we felt that heartbreak as one. You know, when he was dying, Rich said to me when they offered him this, to pass through, spend eternity in this fucking graveyard you're so in love with, he said, how can I? When she missed out, how can I?
5 minutes later.
Frankly, it's jarring. And I mean, that's not to say that I'd prefer it if the ending was changed so that Kelly didn't join San Junipero, because I don't. I actually really like this ending. The issue I have with it isn't with where the story went, but how it got there. Like, after her speech, Kelly just sort of stares into nothingness for a couple scenes and then does a complete 180 on everything she believes in for no discernible reason. Like, was it pity? Was it love? Was it hate? Was it just a fear of death? We don't really know, which is a really big problem for me, because the story has been building up to this moment since the beginning of the episode. The second we find out about Kelly and Yorkie's conflicting opinions about San Junipero, we know that eventually their different viewpoints are bound to clash. And they do, with Kelly's speech, but in the end, everything gets resolved off screen, basically. We just have to assume that something made Kelly change her mind, but we're not told what that is. Like, for the sake of comparison, let's take a look at 15 Million Merrits real quick. In that episode, we also get a character who makes a big dramatic speech about his ideals, but then betrays them in the end. But here's the thing, in 15 Million Merrits, we actually know why Bing changed his mind. After one of the judges essentially commercialized and corrupted his heartfelt speech, he realized that there was nothing he could do that would change the way things were. Basically, if you can't beat him, join them. But in San Junipero, there's nothing bridging Kelly's speech to her drastic change of mind. Ultimately, it just feels like there's a scene missing here, cause as it stands, this whole thing just seemed really sloppy. But anyways, with that out of the way, let's talk about the ending. Now, death has always been, since the beginning of time, the end basically. For everyone. No matter how wealthy, how powerful, or how strong you are, in the end, everyone dies. But with San Junipero, death kinda becomes obsolete. Now you're given the opportunity to tell death to go fuck himself and go live in San Junipero instead. What's not to like? Well, the interesting thing about this ending is that your interpretation of whether or not you see it as being happy or tragic varies wildly from person to person. It really depends on your personal views and beliefs. For instance, an atheist will most likely see San Junipero as being heaven on earth, like the episode puts it, and would probably describe the ending as Kelly and Yorkie ride off into the sunset and live happily ever after. However, from my personal point of view, as a Catholic, I see this ending as being one of the most frightening and tragic endings in the entirety of the show. Like, assuming that they somehow uploaded their souls into this thing, I can't help but think that Kelly pretty much abandoned her family. I just keep picturing Kelly's husband and daughter waiting for her in heaven, while she decides to stay in some artificial video game world with some chick she's only just met. And hell, even if I remove my faith from the equation, I still can't see this ending as being anything other than tragic. Like, there's a good chance that the Kelly and Yorkie we see in the ending aren't even actually the real Kelly and Yorkie. They could just be computer code a la the Cookie and White Christmas.
Do you know what a copy is?
As in a copy of something, of course I know what that is.
Well, that's what you are.
So, if we look at it that way, the episode literally ends with both our protagonists dying and rotting in the fucking ground, while some computer code tries its damnedest to mimic what these two were like as hyper-positive 80s music blasts in the background. That's a dark and tragic ending in my book. But again, your interpretation depends on who you are as a person, so you might totally disagree with everything I've said. And that's totally fine, it's great even. Whether intentional or not, the ending's flexibility in its interpretation is greatly appreciated in my book. Anyways, to round things up, let's get real for a second. After much reflection on this, I've honestly come to the conclusion that even if San Junipero didn't have all the problems I had with it, I don't really think I would have enjoyed it that much more than what I originally did. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is that this episode just wasn't made for me. Like, for example, a reoccurring compliment brought up in many of the reviews I've read is how people are really glad that there's positive LGBT representation in it. So obviously that's a big factor as to why this episode is loved as much as it is, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I'm biased, you're biased, everyone's biased. But like, me personally, if I see a gay couple in any sort of media, I don't go, oh, it's the gay agenda. But at the same time, I don't give it extra points for the mere fact that there's a gay couple in it. You know what I mean? I'm indifferent about it. I hope this doesn't come off as heartless or mean, but I just don't care. On top of that, I also don't particularly care that much about the 80s setting. In all honesty, I find it to be kind of overused at this point, and like I've said before, I'm also not a big fan of love stories. I think they're horribly uninteresting and boring 90% of the time. That being said though, if I did like these things, I'd probably love this episode, but I don't, so that might explain it. But hey, who knows? You might change my mind in the comments, so give that a shot if you want. And yeah, that's that. Thanks for watching.